set auto-destruct sequence.
What's the time allotted that concerns me?
Recognize Picard, Jean-Luc, Captain. Recognize Riker, William T., Commander.
Maximum warp.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. We are on the Warp Core Podcast, episode 90. That's right, we are 10 from a century here at the Warp Core Podcast. Thanks to you, all of our pending rebrand fans. We look forward to jumping into all kinds of new adventures, and shall we say, we will boldly go where no one has gone before. I don't want to mince too many words here. Fert Derby, Lord Uther, thanks for joining me as always. We are finally cracking into the next generation of Star Trek. And this is known as what I think we've coined on our show as the Rick Berman universe, which launched 3 different Star Trek series in the very short span of about 20-ish years. So looking forward to everything we're going to be covering in the next who knows how many weeks. Obviously, we have some new Star Trek shows coming. We'll be jumping on board with those as we get to them. But we will be talking this next generation with another one of our favorite baldies, starring front and center, Jean-Luc Picard, a.k.a. Patrick Stewart, a.k.a. the Lion in Winter. But we are looking at some serious Trekkie talk. I just want to get some forecast from you guys before we jump into the show itself. I really want to get your gut reactions when you first saw the Next Gen and what it was like for you. Because I distinctly remember when I saw it, but y'all may have some different perspectives. So, Lord Uther, let's start with you. You first saw Next Gen back in the day. What was your mind blown?
I was resistant at first because I think I was so used to the original series. So I had a feeling it was going to, I was just trying to figure out what was I seeing with this new ship and this new crew and an android that was Spock. At least that's how I was feeling, and how Will Riker and Jean-Luc Picard seemed to be a split, almost like taking Shatner and splitting him in half in a sense. So, there were things there, and I guess we'll reflect on this in a little while there. But it was excitement too, right? Because it was something new, and they were going to take the series, in a new direction, try and make something happen. And so just the idea that they were going to try and bring it back also shows what we've talked about before, the fortitude that Star Trek fans have and the passion that they have for it too, that they were actually able to bring it back.
And Fert Derby, how about you?
I want to put it in perspective, gentlemen. When Star Trek The Next Generation first beamed onto our television sets on September 28, 1987, I was 14 years old. I was still a virgin. I had been in high school with Lord Uther for exactly 1 month. So it was a while ago. It's been a minute since this show first kicked off. Now, Star Trek, we mentioned in our original series run that my entry into the show was actually through the movies. And so, in perspective, this series premiered about 13 months or so after the voyage home, Star Trek IV, with all of our whales in present-day San Francisco. And it would be another 14 months or so before we got The Final Frontier, where they went camping in Yosemite, battled some pesky Klingons, and tried to talk to God. So that's where this is landing. So you have a well-received Star Trek franchise on the big screen. Lots of critics thought IV was the best of the bunch. We had not yet stumbled into William Shatner's big screen directorial debut yet, although that film does look better in hindsight, as we've discussed right here on the Warp Core. But I think, sort of echoing a slight comment from my bridge buddy, Lord Uther there, this was a different dynamic, and we'll talk about this when we talk about the pilot. And so, yes, there was sort of a learning curve to try to get comfortable. I watched the pilot the night it aired. I believe it was a Friday night, maybe. It might have been a Friday night. I think the show eventually, because it was in syndication, hundreds of different TV stations around the country played it where they thought it would best play. So I think in some markets it might have been on Saturday nights, in some markets it might have been Friday nights. So it wasn't like a network show or something where you could tune in at 9 o'clock on Thursday night and see Star Trek. You kind of had to look for it in your market. And I watched the pilot, and we'll talk about my feelings on the pilot in a few moments. But yes, let's just say that it took a moment. I wasn't resistant, but it took a moment for me to really wrap my arms around it. Again, 14 years old, friends. There was a lot more hair up here, and there were a lot less mileage on this. But yeah, let's get into it. Let's talk Trek. What do you?
Let's talk the
remember?
pilot.
What do you remember? Because you're coming a little bit behind us, Ursa. How old were you approximately, or when you? I mean, obviously you were around in 1987. I don't believe, but.
I was born the following year, so I was born in season 2. I did start watching very early because I was very fortunate. We lived with my grandparents who had satellite TV. So, and this was in the very late 80s, early 90s, that you could get a lot of content by just manually dialing up a number on your dish. And so, fortunately, I was protected from some of the more racy stuff by adults who were aware of what was going on with satellite TV at the time. But I did get to see Star Trek, a lot of Star Trek, late at night. And actually, it seemed to be broadcast kind of all the time because it was broadcast, like you said, on so many channels that when it started to make the transfer to satellite TV, it's kind of like now with Pluto, where you could watch Star Trek just about any time you want. So I got a lot of the original series on just RF broadcast and satellite. And I remember pretty distinctly, it was probably when it first hit rerun syndication on local TV that I saw the pilot episodes. It wasn't quite after the end of the series. I want to say I picked it up in '93 because there was a run of shows that I would watch, I think, every single week. Back when you watch TV on a certain night every single week. I think they called it must-see TV on NBC or something like that. And part of their weekly lineup, it was Star Trek Next Generation. I think it was Star Trek Deep Space Nine on UPN. So I would flip back and forth. I would watch Next Gen, and then I'd go to Deep Space Nine, and then I'd come back because after the show in between that DS9 laid over, which I think would have been, maybe it was local news actually. They would play that Outer Limits show and reruns of the X-Files. I flip-flopped it. X-Files and then Outer Limits. Maybe it was Saturday night. It must have been Saturday nights because I was up late. But I remember very, very distinctly what I thought when I first saw Q floating in on that chair. That is the image that has stuck with me for life. And I'm a Q fan. And I'm so excited for this series because, as you Warp Core fans may know from our archives, when we talked Picard Season 2 and Season 3, spoiler alert, I was so excited to see Q. And I would love to see Q in everything. So being a big Q fan started, it was probably 1993, 94. And I've watched, God, I don't even know how many times I've watched front to back all the way through the series at this point. Many, 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 many times because I was hooked. Of course, and I want to put this controversy to rest because I think at the time this debuts, this is where fans started this Star Wars, Star Trek fake rivalry, which does not exist, by the way. Roddenberry loved Star Wars, and Lucas loved Star Trek, and they both kind of needed each other to survive when they first came out in the late 70s. So, like, there's no motion picture without Star Wars. So that, and there's no Star Wars without TOS. So I just want to put it out there that I was probably the kid in school that did not have an opinion at first, but all the little kids I went to school with were like, I love Boba Fett and Darth Vader, and Captain Picard and Data are stupid. And it's like, why can't you like both? Both are great. So that's my take.
Awesome. Well, let's think back, Warp Core fans, to June of 1969, when Turnabout Intruder was the final broadcast episode of Star Trek on network TV. Fans were left adrift. Where shall we get our Star Trek fix beyond reruns on your local syndicated channels? There was an experiment done with animation, something the Warp Core podcast takes seriously and may be revisiting in the weeks and months ahead. And it featured many, if not all, of the original voice cast. But that was pretty much it. You could show up at these science fiction conventions with people dressed as Vulcans or Klingons, and you could interact with fans. This is well before the World Wide Web. But that was pretty much how things were going until, as Ursa points out, a little picture called Star Wars came on, blasted a hole in Hollywood preconceived notions about science fiction. Suddenly everybody wanted to be in space, and that helped jumpstart Paramount's interest in Star Trek. At first, they wanted to go back to television. Their first attempt was right after Star Wars premiered. They announced in June of 1977 that they wanted to do Star Trek Phase 2. And everybody but Leonard Nimoy was going to be in this version. All of the cast members, many who had participated in the animation from Filmation. And they were going to have two new characters, a navigator, Lieutenant Ilea, and an XO, Willard Decker. Well, the television series Phase 2 never got out of space dock, but most of its ideas for the 2-hour pilot and those two characters got integrated into Star Trek the Motion Picture. And away they went. So this is actually sort of the third attempt, the next generation, to kind of stand up Star Trek on television for people in their living rooms each and every week. Gene Roddenberry was actually not the first one approached to run the show. The Paramount was going to go with a different sort of creative voice. That didn't work out, so they kind of said, I guess we'll ask Gene. Gene, of course, said, I'd love to. I'm delighted. This would be swell. And he started getting the gang back together from the original series. He had some people who worked in costumes, and he had some people who worked in the special effects departments, and so on and so forth. But this would be a brand new holistic vision of Star Trek, launched in the late Reagan years. And hopefully they thought, with state-of-the-art special effects and so forth. In fact, many of the visual effects were, for the time, computer generated, almost fully animated for the small screen. Industrial Light and Magic created the models for the NCC 1701D, and every week in the opening credits you can see a graceful pass by the camera of the D, and you can see it, it looks like something you'd see in a Star Trek movie from the big screen. Now, many of the in-episode effects were sort of done with actual computers and animation. And that was actually one of my big hesitations early when I saw it, because even to the 14-year-old untrained eye, there was a certain artificiality about it, a certain cleanness. It looked shiny and brand new, when they would fire a phaser or when they would come across another ship or so forth. And again, I don't have a problem with it in my graying years. But at the time, I said, oh, this doesn't look as cool as what they were doing, for Star Trek 4 or Return of the Jedi or, any of the ILM stuff that we were used to on the big screen. So I was a little resistant initially to the idea that this was sort of a clean. There was another show that Paramount launched at the same time. It was an updating of the War of the Worlds, and it lasted about 3 seasons. It was a Canadian import, primarily shot up north with Canadian talent. But they too were using these, again, at the time, state-of-the-art, like television-generated visual effects. But again, you could only take the technology so far, especially on a television budget. Again, they weren't blowing out like Andor and Ahsoka and Star Trek Strange New Worlds budgets for television back then. You had to work within those parameters. And within those parameters, fabulous. But for somebody who was used to seeing top line money invested, again, for these 70 millimeter 6-track Dolby stereo experiences, it came in at like a 4 when
Fell flat.
Yeah, it came in like a 4 for me visually when I was, used to 6s and 7s. So that was something. Now
That's an interesting
yeah,
point. I just wanted to jump on that because Star Trek 4 is my favorite TOS movie by a very, very long shot around the sun. And I never thought of it that way, that at the time, that's what every Star Trek fan is going to compare it to. You're looking at this brand new TV series. Now, granted, small screen to big screen, you expect some differences. But that original broadcast run had to leave some things to be desired. And of course, you're comparing it with TOS too. But I think about now, and we'll talk about this a little bit with both the pilot and the Naked Now when we get into that episode. But you think about the setting, right? Get beyond the ship and the phasers and all that, but think about the settings you see in this first season. Like, it's just a stage, a sound stage, and the lighting is goofy. Like in this first pilot episode, when they get into the trial room, and it's like bleachers and Shang Tsung from Mortal Kombat is there announcing the whole deal, which a little bummed he didn't show up again on the series until Voyager. But it's just bizarre to me that you think about the costumes look just like some rags they pulled out of the closet. And the little battle test arena that they put him in with the French dressed up aliens. I mean, that's straight out of TOS. Like they could have just reused whatever soundstage they hadn't torn down yet. I'm actually surprised they didn't shoot anything at Vasquez Rocks for this first episode. So I think that's a great point. Is there's not only are we adjusting to a new cast and the chemistry of this new crew, which Lord Uther brings this up point quite saliently, is that there's a huge curve to setting up this crew. Like, how do you care about these people? And they try and do that in this first episode, and we'll talk about Denise Crosby. But
yes, we will.
It's hard because you have to overcome, like, people remember TOS for the hokey kind of spray painted foam rocks and the James R. Kirk tombstone against what's his face with the silver eyes and all that nonsense. Like, there's a lot going on that they just, and you can see it's the Roddenberry influence early in this production, that it's just like, well, we did this before and it worked just fine. It makes me wonder how it was received, and I think it was critically well received. But like, from the fan perspective, were you expecting more than you were in 1965, or were you like, well, this is what the TV show is?
Uther?
Well, again, I think you're so used to the other characters from the original series, you're trying to figure out, again, if we're going off of back then, you're just trying to figure out, are we going to to your point, are we going to be as endeared to them as we were with TOS? And I brought up in our little chat that I really feel if it wasn't for Patrick Stewart, and I always say his last name wrong, Delancey, did I say it right?
John Delancey.
Yeah. They carried the pilot, in my opinion. Their acting did. If it wasn't for the two of them, everyone else... And so that we've talked about this before with other things, they must have been comfortable in their role and felt good about it or read it enough, or they did something where their preparation seemed to be, they just felt comfortable where everyone else seemed like they were still trying to figure it out. Jonathan Frakes, actually, he might have been a little bit maybe he was right there with Patrick Stewart, but everyone else, I mean,
they were pretty cherry.
Yeah, think about just how Deanna Troi was acting. And they were leaning into that a lot. And I know I'm getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here, but some things they were leaning into because they were trying to establish these characters, or hopefully establish trends maybe, or establish future things that we would see out of these characters, which wind up going away. Like, I don't feel like they leaned on Troi that much as they move forward. They just developed her in a different way. But I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
It should be noted for those of you who are just coming to the Next Generation, first of all, where the heck have you been? But the new cast members deserve a shout out here, as always. Patrick Stewart is our Mon Capitan. Jonathan Frakes, LeVar Burton, Gates McFadden, Brent Spiner, Marina Sirtis. For first season, Denise Crosby, Michael Dorn, and young Will Wheaton, who is coming off of Stand By Me from the summer of 19... So now let's dive in here. Founder at Farpoint, and here, September 28th, he was a also Bud Hundred, Rebel Without a Cause. Kids are angry.
Are we losing his audio?
He would go on.
I'm not sure.
He would go on to direct Dallas, Hawaii Five-0, Hill Street Blues, Murder, She Wrote. He won an Emmy for his Hill Street Blues direction in 1984. The writers were D.C. Fontana from the original series. She and Gene Roddenberry had patched things up over the years, only to see that go horribly awry later in the season. We'll get into that as we get there. So D.C. Fontana and Gene Roddenberry are credited with this pilot episode. And this pilot episode does feel in many ways, as Ursa points out, like a template from the original series, just given a new coat of paint and some flashy special effects and some new faces. We have an omniscient, godlike being messing around with the crew. We have an alien race, a mystery to be solved on world, and so on and so forth. It actually, for me, looking back now, it has echoes of late 70s, 1970s science fiction television that had also come in the interim. It felt when they were down in the marketplace shopping for fabric, that could have come right out of Gil Gerard's Buck Rogers in the 25th century, as you say, right down to the costuming of the extras and the lighting and the general sound staginess of it. Yeah, it certainly leaned on the original series, but again, that could have been a Buck Rogers sequence. It also could have been a Battlestar Galactica, 1978, with Lorne Greene. It was almost as if they're like, well, this worked before, so we could stage it like this. And then we'll just lean heavily into crazy costumes and makeup and hope nobody really, cares. So those were things that I was thinking of as I was watching it. I know that some critics loved the Royal Shakespeare Company, Patrick Stewart gravitas, but I know people who were raised on Kirk, I like to kick things. He, he was stern and he was bald, and he wasn't going to do all the fisticuffs and all of the stunts. Obviously, as Uther points out, that's what Riker was for. So some people said, well, why isn't he the villain? Because, he's mean and he barks orders yells at Wesley. And so, again.
Shut up, Wesley.
I mean, yes. I think one of the things I enjoyed when I saw the man trap, one of the first original series season 1 episodes that finally aired after the cage and where no man has gone before. I think I was impressed by how easily the big three had that sort of chemistry together. Nimoy, Shatner, Kelly. But here, yeah, they were going to have to work on it a little. I think that Jonathan Frakes needs to get some facial hair. I'm just looking at those cheeks. I was surprised though because I know where these characters end up. I was surprised by how many early traits I was spotting, and how comfortable. I mean, seeing Brett Spiner as Data now is probably a lot less like, oh, that's just the Vulcan and he's painted yellow, than it would have been in 1987. So I see those characters. I see Beverly Crusher. I see who they're going to become, and so I'm a little more forgiving of some maybe early, like, let's try this and see how it works there. A brief word on Will Wheaton and Denise Crosby. They are two characters who have earned their share of, I won't say backlash or scorn, but certainly people have opinions. I think early on in this show, at least in the brief 2 episodes we're going to be covering on the Warp Core this cycle, I think I see exactly what they were trying to go for, a new dynamic, trying to get youth in a science fiction show. Again, Buck Rogers had Tweaky, the cute little robot, and they occasionally had Gary Coleman cameos, the little Different Strokes kid. And Battlestar Galactica had Boxy and his Daggett Muffy running around the ship, barking and getting in underfoot. So this was something that science fiction did. Sequest DSV put in a kid. Like, you had to have some sort of youth element there to keep eyeballs, I suppose. That was just what you did. I don't have a problem with Will Wheaton. I know he was coming off Stand By Me. I understand the assignment they gave him. Denise Crosby, though, she felt, at least early on in this pilot and so forth, I don't think she really had grasped what a science fiction universe she was stepping into. And I don't know if that was her fault or not, but I think she was kind of trying to approach it from maybe a more reality-based place, and it did not come across as strong. I know they gave her stunt double a fight scene here when they're being judged and so forth. Tasha Yar, she's tough. But I didn't think in this pilot it served her particularly well. I wanted to see Michael Dorn, when he steps up and says, "And now, sir, permission to clean up the bridge." Like, in just one low baritone growl, Michael Dorn is like, I love that Klingon. Let's let him. He pulls a phaser on the view screen. Mr. Worf, are you going to shoot a hole in our view screen? So he came across as much more direct and authoritative than Tasha did. And again, I'm not going to sit there and critique Denise Crosby's thespianic abilities. I think she, of all the cast members, she seemed the least comfortable in her own skin in this pilot. And we'll talk about her in episode 2, because I actually think they tried to do some early development with her that was interesting, albeit problematic in a current sense. But gentlemen, I mean, again, this is foundational Trek of a new generation. And some things worked, some things probably could still use a little tweaking, but it's 1987, remember. I mean, overall, how did that experience go with you. And what do you think of Tasha Yar?
That's a great place to start. Well, I want to talk about the episode first, just because I treat this as one episode. I know it's two. It was a two-part debut, which I love that they started this show with a two-parter, because that really sets up the rest of this series. Because there's a lot of two-part episodes, and they did it best. A lot of other sci-fi shows since then have adopted this model, either with multi-part episodes or two-part episodes, and I still think TNG has some of the finest multi-part episodes that you'll ever see, and this is one of them for sure. There's a lot of technical issues with this episode. There's the lighting goofiness of it. There's the staging, which is a little goofy, but it's intended to be a little odd, right? Q himself is an odd character. And this is an entirely new experience for anybody. This is not Trelane, and this is not any of the other godlike beings we've experienced before. This is a truly omnipotent, omniscient force. So it's unique to that end, although it's a little jarring at times, and certainly through a modern lens it looks a little hokey. But they do a lot of really good world building. They give you some history of Earth, they give you some history of the Federation, of a lot of what Earth went through to get to this better future, which we really didn't get much of in 67, or I should say in the original series. And you get a lot of forced character development. You have a Klingon on the bridge crew, which was a huge change. And obviously the Klingon makeup, very different, more aligned with the movies. And so that kind of helped mold some things a bit, and a different crew dynamic, a captain who hates children or is at least uncomfortable around them, a child, a captain who has a maybe romantic history with that child's mom that's a little questionable. There's a whole lot to what's going on here that they're setting up. And then you get like a really great performance of this alien, I don't know if you want to call him a magistrate, that they're trying to bargain with at Farpoint Station outside of the whole Q discussion. And you get, the whole, asserting of the dominance over the number one. Well, you have to dock manually. You can do it, can't you? Well, of course I can. And then it's flawless. And then you get the foundational friendships of the show that are getting set up, Riker and Data. And you get LeVar Burton being sort of insert there, who's really just a bridge crew member. He's an engineer, but he's just sort of the navigation guy right now. So a lot of these folks, like, they develop as the show goes, but they start out in a place where it's like there's growth here, or at least the potential of, except Tasha Yar. And I could rail on this character forever. And I don't blame Denise Crosby. I think for what she was given, she does a brilliant job. She is a damaged human being that was born under horrible circumstances and tries to kind of bring that out. I'm guessing there was a discussion behind the scenes saying, hey, this is your character's backstory. Try and bring that through in some of these lines. And I think DC Fontana really wanted her to be more than she was. And this is where I think they tried to set up the idea of these episodes are going to be character driven. So we have to set up everybody's sort of character arc. So the later episodes about them, people care. And I love that. I love the foresight of it. I just don't give a shit about Tasha Yar. And I'm sorry, because I know she has a lot of diehard fans. And I do appreciate her contributions to the show. And it's a lasting one. Obviously, she, in hologram form, makes an appearance in Picard Season 3. But Worf is a much better fit for security officer. It was weird to have a human female above a Klingon, and the Klingon have seemingly no problem with that. It was just bizarre. It was a weird setup. And her character was kind of weird. Her lines felt very odd and forced. And the way they kind of used her in this first season just never really seemed to find its fitting. Like, it never seemed to have a good form or function. And we'll talk about it later, but I think as the show changes, you realize she's not as important of a character as maybe they wanted her to be.
There's no chief of engineering, right?
Yeah.
Or that was kind of a mystery almost, because that wasn't Geordi, I believe, and I've never seen the episode, and I believe there's one out there where he gets the official title, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. The first 3 seasons, quite honestly, for me are a little bit of a blur, because, again, as the show progresses, it just gets better and better. So I've seen some episodes here and there, especially with the first season. So that kind of caught me right away, that there's no real... Because I was looking for Scotty or someone like a Scotty. And we really didn't get that. I think the female, I can't remember her name off the top of my head. Fert, do you remember her name off the top of your head at all?
We will introduce her in the next episode. I don't recall.
Oh, it's the next episode.
But it was Brooke Bundy was the quote.
Okay.
Chief engineer. But don't get too attached, I guess is where I'm going with that.
Yeah, right. So I thought that was, and so I feel like they didn't know what to do with Worf. Obviously, they had the character there though. They obviously wanted a Klingon there, and I think we know why they were looking to do that, because when I first saw it, I remember that catching me off guard. Like, wait a minute, there's a Klingon on the bridge. That's not right. They didn't really know what to do with Geordi. And so, but again, with all that said, and think about the cinematic sequences when the Enterprise, when the saucer section separates, that really stuck out in my head, because it was almost this 2001 like sweeping big deal that this is happening, and it went on way longer than it probably truly needed to, but I think they were trying to give you almost like the breadth of what was happening. Like, this is a really big deal that this can do this. Hey, look, let's look and see that this can happen. And then it was, Chief O'Brien. They weren't sure what to do. I mean, they threw everyone but the kitchen sink into this episode. It's almost like, let's see what sticks too. Kind of, it had that feeling as well. Or the cheesy sequence where Riker gets the saucer section in the battle bridge to reconnect, and like it was this big deal that he was drifting that part into the saucer section, and and again, maybe I'm looking at it as a Star Trek fan for 40 years, right? So, and it's having seen this episode many times, it's like, man, this is just the biggest slice of cheese I think I've ever seen. But seeing it then, that was pretty cool. So I have to be very tempered as we go through this with me now versus watching it then, because it was at the point, I think it was season 5 or 6, I would go over to my friend Scott's house like it was a big deal to watch a new episode coming out, because it had caught fire that much and people were so into it, to actually watch them, those episodes premiere, it was amazing. So again, it's wonderful, but again, just like a potluck of let's see what can happen with these characters.
It's funny you mentioned the saucer reconnection. You can correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't seen every minute of the Berman verse, but I don't think we see too many more saucer reconnections through the life of the show. And I don't think we see too many saucer unconnections, if we're being quite honest there. But you can tell with a pilot, a 2-hour premiere movie that they launched, they're like, well, we need to put in some majesty and scope and scale, as Uther says. So we have that. We have a very long walk through the holodeck, like far longer than we needed to. It's almost like, yeah, we shot this one here out in the swamp. We better get our money's worth. It wasn't quite Vasquez Rocks. It had water. But that sequence, too, felt a little elongated, again, just for the point of, we're not going to ship all these cameras out here and then just get, a quick thing of, hey, I need you on the bridge. So that was there. Real quick hits. loved hearing Jerry Goldsmith's score as the title sequence. That was one of the best elements of the motion picture. It's one of the first soundtracks I had on vinyl growing up as a child. So it was great to hear those repurposed for this show. In fact, it was so jarring that I got mad at Star Trek V when I first saw it, because Jerry Goldsmith was the composer for The Final Frontier, and he was using that same theme, and at that point, I had associated that with The Next Generation. So I'm like, wait a minute, you can't, this is a weird cross-pollination here, Jerry. Pick a lane. The show's internal music, aside from the title sequence, was done by Dennis McCarthy, and he would go on to score Next Gen, he would score Deep Space Nine, he would score Voyager, he would score Star Trek Generations before they brought Jerry Goldsmith back to do First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. So McCarthy is the one that you're hearing that music. And I'll be honest with you, I think the music here in the Bermanverse, I think it helps add shadings, depth, scale, and tension. And I don't hold it against Alexander Courage and the composers of the original series, but I don't know that music didn't feel as influential, and this could have been a John Williams thing for me, in the sense that in the interim, John Williams had come and redefined orchestral scoring as we know it. But I just feel like for Next Generation, even if there are variations of similar themes, I feel like the music propels you. It makes scenes seem more dramatic sometimes than maybe the writing and acting is giving us. So it kind of like forces you to stay in the moment, you know. And then sometimes they might do a da da da, you know, as we go to commercial break. You know, sometimes it might overplay its welcome slightly. But for the most part, I think Dennis McCarthy, I have some of his seasons on compact disc, and I've played them too. And it's a very nice counterpoint with the show, and I think it deserves mention, so on and so forth there. Gentlemen, whether you're grading it as 14-year-olds or whether we're doing it now as elder statesmen, we should really talk Warp Cores for Encounter at Farpoint.
Indeed.
And I'm going to just go ahead and say that I can't be 14 again, but I also recognize how it all plays out. I think this first episode and how I feel with the characters and everything else, I honestly think that I'm going to go with a 6, because I think this is a strong start to what will become a lasting show. And I think we can quibble around the edges, and there are certainly things worth quibbling, but I also don't think it deserves to be, you know, middle of the pack. I feel like this is a good step forward, and we will see improvements along the way. We're calling it the Rick Berman universe, but he and his fellow showrunners and writers and producers, we will see when their influence starts to creep in. Right now, it's Gene's show, DC Fontana at his side, and some other writers. But, spoiler alert, by the end of season 2, there's not a single writer that was on staff when this show launched is still on the staff. And in fact, many of the season 2 writers who were hired also leave the show by the end of season 2. There was some interesting behind the scenes going on that we'll get into. The show almost didn't make it to a 3rd season in terms of that. But once Rick Berman and Michael Piller and Ronald D. Moore and Brannon Braga and Ira Stephen Bear start, you know, asserting their creative bona fides, then we're really gonna see something. But here, a very good start, I think. I'm going 6.
Uther, I'll let you take the next step.
I'm going 7. I mean, anytime I get Admiral McCoy walking through the Enterprise D, using a finally found very deep Southern drawl, as he's walking through those hallways. That caught me off guard, which I think I messaged you guys about too. Like, wait a second, where did this come from? Really laying into the Southern Doctor thing, but it look it thank God for Next Gen, because it's what allows all of this to continue on. It's like how I look at the Mandalorian. If it wasn't for the Mandalorian, we might be without some Star Wars for a while again, in my humble opinion. And I think without Next Gen, where are we at? So whether it's the 52-year-old me or the 1987 whatever I am then me.
14.
Thank you. Well, 15, but yeah, 14. But thank goodness, because it's going to wind up being everything that we want it to be. So I'm going to go 7.
I'm going to be with Uther on this one. I was thinking 6 just because of some of the technical issues, but I think that's a really good point. It's a 7 for me, and it is because without Farpoint, parts 1 and 2, we don't get more Star Trek. It's dead in the water after Star Trek 6. So I am very appreciative of everything they set out to do. I think it brought on all of the original series fans in a good way. It gave them that good reminder of what this can be, and it gave them a very nice picture of what it will be, without compromising, really. I mean, it introduced a myriad of characters that, yeah, a couple of them probably aren't super necessary as the show goes on, but everything we see sets up everything we're going to see, including the jellyfish in the space thing that we see later on in Picard season 3. So I am all in on Farpoint Station, all in on Next Generation, and it will be fun to boldly go where no one has gone before. And I think to change things up just for the Next Gen, rather than saying live long and prosper, we're going to say we'll see you next time, and make it so.